Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to rise as convener of the Constitution, Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee, or SEAC Committee, to bring this debate to the Chamber and move this motion. This is a large area to cover, and we have been grateful for everyone who gave evidence to the committee and to our clerks for organising our evidence sessions. And also, I'm very grateful to my committee members for their endeavours in this area. This is something perhaps we should take a step back from and widen the lens to see the bigger picture of what we were trying to look at. External affairs is one part of a remit in the committee, but one that represents a vast policy area, and the themes from our inquiry into the Scottish Government's international work are fivefold. I won't be able to do justice to them all today, but I'm sure my committee colleagues will pick up some of the issues that I will miss today. But in outline, our report highlights the importance of adopting a strategic approach, the need for prioritisation of policies to flow from that approach, and an emphasis on effective collaboration across governments. The report also highlights challenges inherent to measuring impact and the no small matter of how we improve parliamentary scrutiny of the Government's work in this area. I will offer some context for each of these, while also setting out our key findings under the headings of updating the international framework, our relationship with the EU, international relations more widely, and international development. Since devolution began, successive Scottish governments have sought a European presence as well as a wider international engagement. Scotland's international framework was published 5 years ago, but it has not been revisited since Brexit. The Scottish Government was committed to publishing a revised document, and yesterday they published Scotland's new Global Affairs Framework. This is a very welcome development. However, I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary will appreciate that the committee hasn't had time or opportunity to consider its content, but I do look forward to hearing more this afternoon and will necessarily need to keep my own remarks to within the parameters of our inquiry. Yes, we'll take Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful to Claire Adamson for allowing the intervention. Yesterday's publication of Scotland's Global Affairs Framework, which I appreciate few of us have had time to look through, but as convener, are you expecting more from the update of the international framework, which, as you say, is now 5 years old?
Claire Adamson. Yeah, I'm sure, yes, the committee is looking forward to all the developments in this area, because it's very important we have the most up-to-date information from the Government. I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary will elaborate on that in his own contributions this afternoon. Presiding Officer, this is not simply a question of who we engage with, but also how and why. The focus on Europe is expected to be a priority, but we also take the view that wider external engagement is necessary. Engagement which must be informed by a strategic approach and with clear geographical and thematic rationale. We believe that a revised international framework should link to and flow from the National Performance Framework. It should be at the heart of the Scottish Government's approach to external affairs, and it should provide a foundation for all other relevant frameworks, strategies and policy documents. Such an approach will provide a better understanding of the Scottish Government's priorities. We also recommend the revised framework sets out values and objectives, stipulates a long-time framework, prioritises countries, regions and themes. It should also provide a clear rationale for that prioritisation, links to relevant aspects of economic, cultural and education policy, and it should also integrate international offices into its strategy. The revised framework should explore how to better inform the public and the media of this work, and to take into account the findings of our report, and that it should also be published as a draft for consultation. Furthermore, with so much of the focus on trade, we suggest that there should be a read across with key economic strategies, including the report of the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery, Scotland's National Strategy for Economic Transformation, and Scotland Outlook 2030, Responsible Tourism for a Sustainable Future. In terms of the European dimension, we consider it crucial that Scotland continues to have a strong relationship with the EU. This is, of course, a very evolving situation post-Brexit, and I indeed believe that the Queen's speech has more developments in that area, and I look forward to the Cabinet Secretary's response to those. We recommend that the Scottish Government publishes a strategy setting out how they intend to approach that engagement. The strategy should include their priorities in relation to alignment with EU law, operation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, engagement of Scottish institutions in EU programmes, and a UK-wide approach, and soft power and informal engagement. Until today, the Scottish Government was still to respond to the Committee's report on the Continuity Act. We are concerned since we published this in November, but I hope the Cabinet Secretary will be able to elaborate on the matter during his own remarks. I will now turn to the wider international relations and soft power. Dr Kirsty Hughes of the Royal Society of Edinburgh told us Scotland's trade, cultural links, soft power reputation and more extend globally, so prioritising some external affairs work beyond the EU is clearly necessary. James Hampson, Director of the UK Region and External Affairs of the British Council, said, "We are in the optimism business. We help people to realise their ambitions and aspirations." The British Council spoke about research undertaken with Creative Scotland and Universities Scotland, work that showed the impact of soft power on business, tourism, international study and diplomacy.
Would the member take an intervention?
Yes, I will.
Fiona Hislop.
As a former Culture and External Affairs Secretary, does she agree with me that soft power is something you actually do, but it's not something that you advertise in a soft power strategy?
Claire Adamson.
I thank Ms Hislop for that. I think from the committee point of view, what we want to do is be able to understand the priorities of the government and also to celebrate the good work that is being done out there, which we think deserves more coverage in the media and for the public to be aware of that work taking place. In a recent study carried out by the University of Edinburgh, they suggest potential returns from investment in this area. A 1% increase in the locations covered by a cultural institution, for instance, showed that almost 0.66% increase in inward investment for the parent country, a figure that would have generated £1.3 billion for the UK in 2016. The Scottish Arts and Humanities Alliance, SAHA, highlighted a reputation on climate policy, digital economy and human rights legislation. So where are the areas of improvement? Professor Murray Pittock, co-chair of SAHA, pointed to the relatively poor recognition of Scotland's cutting-edge position in science as one of the most cited countries in the world. And we do pride ourselves on being a science nation, but perhaps we have to promote that just a little bit wider. And as someone who was introducing Professor David Macmillan, Nobel Prize winner from Scotland in the Royal Society of Edinburgh just recently, these opportunities are there for us. The aim in SAHA's view was to modernise the image we present to the world while not losing the vitality of its appeal. The Scottish Government plans to produce a cultural diplomacy strategy. We recommend that this includes a clear rationale setting out priorities and objectives, again linking to and flowing from the revised international framework, and also setting out how it will interplay with the UK approach to foreign policy. Our view is that issues prioritised in external relations ought to be driven by, match and inform domestic priorities. Policy coherence being the phrase used by the academics and commentators. According to the United Nations, policy coherence can help policymakers better understand how their policy choices today can affect the future population and how their choices could impact on the well-being and sustainable development elsewhere. The harmonisation of policy will be important for mainstreaming the international agenda across government. But it is not just policymakers, We all need to understand how our actions and our behaviours impact on other communities, however far from these shores. Professor Kurt Mills, University of Dundee, and Dr Andrea Birdsall, University of Edinburgh, told us that human rights should be embedded in all aspects of international engagement. They commend the Scottish Government's commitment to develop a feminist foreign policy and highlight initiatives around climate justice, human rights and peace building.
Alistair Allen.
I thank the member for giving way. She refers to human rights and, of course, as I think she's alluded to in the Queen's speech just today, we've heard reference to UK human rights legislation. Can she indicate whether she feels this is going to have an implication on Scotland's work in human rights, the area thereof, given that we don't really know why the UK intends to replace this legislation in the first place?
Claire Adamson.
Thank Dr Allen for his intervention. Yes, I think Scotland has shown its commitment to human rights, and I think this is something that the committee will be looking into going forward following the Queen's speech. I'm afraid I haven't been able to take on all the details of that as yet. The committee is concerned that any tensions between ambitious commitments, whether in the realms of trade, education or cultural exchange, are subject to parliamentary scrutiny. We need good information to gauge where there is policy coherence, where it may be lacking, or where the case can be made for trade-offs and compromise. The Law Society of Scotland argued for greater transparency. They told us a clearer and detailed strategy would be easier to assess in terms of outcomes and delivery. Similarly, the Royal Society of Edinburgh said more regular and detailed reporting could enable further scrutiny. And we recognise the challenges in measuring the impact of diplomacy and soft power. Such work can be difficult to quantify in direct and immediate benefits. But there are initiatives seeking to address this, including the now formally launched Scottish Council on Global Affairs. This is an independent academic network supported on a cross-party basis, and as Professor Phillips O'Brien, Chair of the Strategic Studies at the University of Andrews, has said, it is the right institution at the right time. We encourage the Scottish Government to keep exploring how they can measure the impact of their international work. We also recommend that they publish an annual report detailing the contribution of the international offices. International development is the final area I want to cover, Presiding Officer, and we wish to acknowledge the importance within the international strategy. Written responses to our inquiry suggest policy should be based around developing thematic expertise in areas of climate change, gender and migration, the latter including support for refugees. The committee has been looking separately at the humanitarian response to the crisis in Ukraine, and we have taken powerful evidence from the Disasters Emergency Committee, the Scottish Refugee Council and the Red Cross and others. In the wider context of international development policy, we recognise that the budget, welcome as recent increasing it has been, remains relatively modest. And I fear I have run out of time, Presiding Officer. I have been able to cover everything I would have liked to, but as I said, I'm sure the committee members and other members in the Chamber will pick up on some of those areas, and I move the motion in my name.
Thank you. Thank you. I now call on